Welcome back to Jackson County, Building Zion. This time we're going to do chapters 22, 23, and 24. Chapter 22. I remember overhearing that conversation very vividly, and reliving that experience again, watching it through a different perspective, made me realize how alone I actually was in that moment when I started to feel the change within me. I, of course, didn't recognize it as anything that significant until later. But I know now that as my parents were upstairs with the Michelsons, and I was downstairs finding my breath to be labored, so much so that I had to go out into the fresh air to breathe better, I know now what that was leading to. Lying on the brown cushioned couch in my parents' basement, I realized that the breathing problem may have been coming on since my camping trip by the lake. I was always a very active kid. I loved the outdoors, and I was also a power tumbler. I was a little shorter for my age, but also very fast. They said my physical makeup was perfect for power tumbling. As I got older, I started to stretch out a bit more, and I wasn't quite as fast as I once was. I stopped the power tumbling and just started doing it for fun on the side instead. Still, I kept with being active, especially with scouting and the outdoors. I was also very active as the first counselor in my preschool. Because I was usually doing something very active, most times I didn't notice the little pains or troubles I was having lately with breathing. I also felt that it wasn't as significant a problem that I needed to tell anyone. I was raised to be fairly independent, and so I went on with my duties and figured that this too would pass. After the Michelsons had left, I sat on our beige lawn chair that faced west on our patio. Facing the mountains in the distance, I tried to regulate my breathing. It was an odd sensation to actually think about breathing. I tried to tell myself to breathe normally, and for a moment I thought I may be having an asthma attack or something. It was getting cooler outside. In a few weeks it would be Thanksgiving, and soon after that it would be Christmas. Then in January, when I turned 18, I would be sending in my mission papers. At that time, I remember thinking that no matter what, I needed to get over whatever was going on with me and get better so I could go on my mission and be the missionary the Lord wanted me to be. As the night got later and the air colder, my breathing finally started to go back to normal. After stretching out on the chair, I got up to turn off the patio lights before heading inside. That was when Dad had popped his head outside. "Are you okay, son?" "Yeah, why?" "I just noticed you were out here without a coat or anything on. Weren't you cold?" "Oh, no, I'm fine, Dad, thanks." "Okay, well, I'll be upstairs if you need me." There were times in my life when I thought my parents almost glossed over me. I guess I felt they were busy with other things, and since I never caused too much trouble, they assumed I was always doing okay. Back then, though, when Brett was out on his mission, I started to really connect with my dad, and it was a great feeling. Later that night, around 2:30 in the morning, I found myself outside again, working to bring that precious air into my lungs that I seemed to have been struggling with. The phone call Brett made the next morning was in ways kind of funny. But I know for Brett, he didn't see the humor in the situation. It was a cold Monday morning in Independence, and the heater, though it was on in full, didn't seem to be doing a good enough job for Brett. Lying there in his bed under the sheets, Brett almost didn't want to get out of bed. For a moment, he contemplated his options of lying in bed and letting Melina or Kelson shower first, or sleeping more and being out of hot water. The cold shiver that went down his right leg gave Brett his answer, so quickly he got up and grabbed his clothes so he could feel that warm water he was waiting for. His mind was still kind of hazy that early in the morning, but as he started to wake up to the warm water, he remembered what he had been thinking about towards Savannah. He remembered the companionship inventory he had and how he let it slip that he was worried about Savannah. With all these thoughts coming back to him, he decided he would call Mom and Dad. He knew how they were keeping contact with Savannah, and he also knew that they would be able to tell him how she was doing and if she was all right. Sure, Brett was getting letters, but it just didn't feel the same. Sitting out on the bar stool facing his warmed-up grape nuts mixed with blueberry yogurt, Brett tried to wait until later in the day to call. Because his body was adjusted to missionary time, he had awoken at 6, and now that he had showered and was dressed and eating breakfast, it was barely 7 o'clock. Deciding that he could at least put off the phone call until after scripture study, Brett finished his breakfast and went for his scriptures. It just so happened that at the time Brett found himself in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 121. It had been a good experience for him to be reading the D&C while working and living the law of the gospel. As he was reading, he almost felt childish, especially when he read the part about Joseph Smith not yet being as Job. He really felt that he was being childish and that his worries about Savannah were nothing. It was a speck in the whole grand scheme of things. Still, he wanted to know how she was doing, and he knew his mind wouldn't rest until he heard some good news about her. So once he had finished his reading in the D&C, he figured he had let enough time pass, so he called Mom and Dad. I remember I hadn't slept too well the night before, because of the breathing problem, but also because of the wake-up call I got from Dad. He had gotten up almost around the same time as Brett. He wanted to be able to talk to Savannah before she left her apartment for the day. Mom was still asleep when he made the call. Of course, first Dad had to get the proper permission from the mission president, and then once he got the clearance, he made the call. "Hey, Savannah, sorry if I woke you up. I needed to talk to you about something." "Sure, Dad, what is it?" The whole Savannah calling him Dad thing had started about a month earlier, and every time she did it, my dad couldn't help but smile. It was good because it helped put him at ease. He wasn't sure why, but he was feeling weird about what he needed to do on this call. Inside of him, Dad felt that he shouldn't lie about who it was that wanted to talk to Savannah. She was a big girl, and if she wanted to talk to her parents, then she would. There was no need to lie. "So here's the thing. Your parents came by the other day and asked if I would set up a call with you. I'm not sure how they knew I had contacted with you or why they are asking, really. I just told them I would see what I could do." Savannah was silent for a moment, not sure of what she really wanted. "What do you think I should do?" she asked sincerely. "Well, it's up to you, but I really think it would be good for them to hear from you. I have a feeling that when I asked your father to pray for you the other night, that he actually did it. I don't know if I told you that, but I think hearing from you could only do good things for them." "That's funny. When did you ask them to pray for me?" "It was 2 nights ago." Thinking about her experience on the road with Paul Molesbury, she couldn't help but smile at the notion of her father or mother praying for her. "All right, you can set it up, say tonight at 8-ish. So the call had been made, and the wheels were now in motion. It was maybe an hour or so later when Dad gave me the wake-up call letting me know that Brett was calling, and that if I wanted to talk to him, I should come upstairs. Feeling like I would be a bad brother for saying no and wanting more sleep, I got up and went to the phone. Our conversation centered around me still getting ready for the mission, and I was doing well in school. Things like that, but I could tell he really wanted to talk to Mom and Dad more. So I was only more than happy to let them talk so I could go back to sleep. "Come on, Dad, is that really all you talked about?" "Yes, Brett. She's going to be talking to her parents later tonight at 8. Brett sat on the bar stool hoping for more information, but he was going to have to be happy with what Dad told him, because that was all the information he had so far. "How did her parents seem? Do you think the call will go okay?" "Son, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. Really, you have nothing to worry about. What's with all the questions anyway? You seem even more inquisitive about Savannah than normal." For a moment, Brett contemplated whether or not he should go into how he was really feeling with Dad or not. Of course, Brett figured Dad would tell him to focus on his mission and wait until he could do more about being with Savannah. "I'm okay, Dad, really. I guess I just miss her and worry about her, that's all. She's been through a lot lately. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that she had run away, and now she's thrown into the fire of our church, so to speak. And I just want her to be okay." "I understand, son, really. And I know you've had a soft spot for her since you were kids, and it's only natural that you worry. She sounds like she's doing great, though, and the Spirit is really with her. Don't worry. I'm sure Savannah will let you know how the phone call goes, okay?" "Okay." Satisfied with that, Brett got ready to go teaching, knowing he would be thinking about the phone call Savannah would be having later that night. Savannah was having another wonderful day in the field. After working with Paul Molesbury, she had many teaching engagements set up for that day. Part of her job was not only converting, but submitting names to the local bishops of people ready to live the law of consecration. Luckily, Paul knew many hard-working farmers, some of which were already Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and very active and ready to live the higher law of the gospel. Her day included meeting with a few bishops with more names of people she felt were ready to live the law of consecration. It was wonderful to be working on the cause, and the Spirit was really strong. But Savannah couldn't help but think about the call she would be having later with her parents. The day seemed to go by quickly, almost too quickly for Savannah, and soon she was back home, and the call would be coming in at any moment. Just before her phone was to ring, her companion yelled out a scream of pain from the bathroom. Savannah ran to the bathroom to see what was up. "Hey, are you okay in there?" "Yes, Savannah heard more throwing up and more painful sounds. After knocking on the door, Savannah went in to hold her companion's hair as the throwing up continued. All the while, the phone kept ringing, but Savannah wouldn't be able to pick up. On the other side of the line, Dad looked at Mr. Michelson, not knowing what to say. He waited for what seemed like forever, but nothing happened. Soon he put down the phone and looked at Mr. Michelson, wondering what to say. "She didn't pick up?" Mr. Michelson asked. "No, I don't know what happened. She said to call this time, and she'd be waiting." "What did you tell her?" Dad didn't want to lie, but he also knew he promised the Michelsons that he wouldn't let Savannah know that it was them who would be talking to her. "I let her know I wanted to set up a call for 8. She said it would be fine. You told her it was us that wanted to talk to her, didn't you?" Mr. Michelson started to get angry, and Dad wasn't sure how to bring peace to the situation. "I remember at the time I was working on a math assignment down in my room, but I was struggling because I started to hear raised voices. The next thing I knew, I heard the door slam. Only now, looking back on it through a different perspective, I know that Mr. Michelson said he was going to be taking matters into his own hands, and that one way or another he was going to get through to his daughter, and that she is still part of the family, and that he was still her father." Chapter 23. The passage of time really has changed. To be able to describe how it is now would be too much information for now. To me, looking back on it, Savannah's mission really seemed to have flown by. She was by this part of the story a full year into her mission. After her parents had tried calling her, it seemed that Savannah's companion, Sister Chelsea Noble, was getting sicker. It had started with the vomiting and dizziness. Then, when it wasn't getting better, they went to the hospital, and when it was determined that it wasn't a mere stomach virus, they were sent to the Centerpoint Medical Center in Independence for further examinations. Sitting in the brightly lit waiting area, Savannah had been saying silent prayers, hoping things would work out for the best for Sister Noble. It had gotten to the point where Chelsea's parents had been asked to come, and they were due any moment. Savannah was almost hoping that Chelsea's parents would get there quickly, so they could all get the news on Chelsea at the same time. Looking towards the entrance and then back towards the doctor's door, Savannah was waiting as patiently as she could to see what would happen. Unfortunately for Savannah, it turned out that the doctor came through the door before the Nobles were able to show up. "Hi, Savannah, right?" "Yes, doctor. Tell me, how is she?" "Well, she was very dehydrated because of all the fluid she lost, and her temperature hasn't dropped yet, making me a little concerned about her fever. Are her parents going to be here soon?" "Yes, they should be here any moment. So what do we do about her fever?" "Well, we've given her a fever reducer, and we're doing what we can to get her temperature to go down, but right now that's about all we can do." "I understand." Savannah couldn't believe how close she was, starting to feel towards her companion. It was hard to keep her emotions in check while she was hearing about Chelsea's condition. Her silent prayers continued with more strength. While being in deep concentration, Savannah didn't notice the Nobles were trying to get her attention. "Oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't noticed you came in." "You're Savannah, right?" Miss Noble asked. "Yes, you just missed the doctor, though. I'm sorry." "What did he say? What's wrong with my daughter?" "Well, she's got a pretty aggressive fever right now that they're working on reducing." "Oh, they said she was throwing up a lot. Has that stopped, or?" "Yes, that's gone away. It just made her really dehydrated. So they have her on an IV drip to help rehydrate her." The wait in that hospital seemed to last forever. They were growing more and more concerned that the fever wasn't going away. Chelsea wouldn't last much longer at that temperature. Later that same night, Chelsea had passed away. The doctors had to break the news to the Nobles and Savannah. Chelsea had passed on, and when the fever had taken over. Needless to say, after the Michelsons' attempt at calling Savannah, they weren't at all too thrilled about ever seeing or talking to our family again. It was also around this same time that I was feeling better, and with my mission call that would be coming soon, I was glad to be feeling better. Mom and Dad weren't quite sure what they should do about the Michelsons, but more than that, they were worried about Savannah. They had tried calling the mission president to find out about her whereabouts, but all he said was that she was at the hospital with her companion. When they called later and found out that Chelsea had died, that that was where Savannah had been, Mom and Dad waited a week before calling Savannah. She was a different person on the phone, but understandably so. Still, Mom and Dad wished there was something they could do to help Savannah with her grief. It was unfortunate that there was a bit of communication problem going on between Mom and Dad and Brett. They had assumed that Savannah would keep in contact with Brett, but it seemed that soon she didn't want to talk to anyone. Not even Mom and Dad, when they would call to check on her. When Brett would call Mom and Dad, they would tell him that they hadn't heard from Savannah. They had told Brett, of course, about Chelsea and why Savannah may be staying away from people, but that made Brett want to talk to Savannah even more. It was also hard for Brett to concentrate on his work while Savannah was having a hard time on her mission. He had received the news of how the wall was progressing and that the work was moving forward very well in Jackson County. But it just didn't seem to mean as much without Brett knowing Savannah's situation and how she was feeling. He prayed for her constantly, and never would a night pass without Mom and Dad and Brett praying for her. Meanwhile, I was working on getting myself ready for my mission call. I was reading the scriptures and gaining as much gospel knowledge as possible. I wanted to try and be like the scripture says, to have an answer to any man that asketh of my reason to believe. Another strange thing started to come into my life, and that was my impression that my call was going to be to Jerusalem. I wasn't sure why I was feeling this way, but because of it, I started studying everything I could on Jerusalem's culture and about the Jewish religion. I at least wanted a basis to understand where they were coming from. I normally wouldn't have gone to all this trouble to learn about the culture, but the feeling was so strong. I felt I really needed to do this and that it would pay off once I got my call. It did still feel weird, so I wasn't telling people yet. This study was on my own so far. After months of not hearing from Savannah, Brett had almost fallen into the mindset of not wanting or needing to send letters to her anymore. He figured that maybe she was really engaged in the work and that she didn't have time for Brett anymore. Or because of what happened with Sister Noble, maybe she had fallen into a depression and didn't want to deal with him yet. Then Brett remembered a time on his mission when his patience was tried, but it did pay off. There were investigators that for months sometimes would seem to be moving nowhere. Then after 2 or 3 transfers, Brett would hear back and find out that they had set a baptismal date, and Brett would finally feel vindicated. Of course, this time it wasn't about vindication too much. It was more of the fact that Brett wanted Savannah to know that he was there for her and that he wanted to support her no matter what. So as the months moved on, Brett still continued to write, not too pressingly, but enough that Savannah would know he was still there and supportive of her. Of course, he was still feeling that sense that he would marry her someday, and he wanted that time to come sooner. But everything would come in its own due time. There was no forcing anything. After Sister Noble had passed on, Savannah really did go back to work hard. She had decided to not contact her parents yet, and she was still working through things. And she still didn't know why her parents were trying to contact her so many months ago. Something inside of her felt worried that maybe they were going to try and talk her out of her mission. It was while meeting with the mission president one day that this subject of her parents had come up. Sister Michelson, I know this has been a hard time for you these past months, and I normally wouldn't ask, but I have heard you haven't written to your parents or anyone for the last several months. Yes, well, I guess I've just been really focused on my work. That's good. That's what you need to do. But I've heard that you've been writing with someone before Sister Noble passed. Savannah hadn't really wanted to discuss it. She felt like Brett would find it hard to focus on his work if Savannah were to bother him with her troubles through a letter. It did sound silly, but that is how she felt. Still, she didn't want to lie to the president. Yes, there was someone I was writing before, but that kind of passed. Is it too personal to ask who it was? No, it was just a friend from back home. Oh, I see. Can I ask how your parents feel about the work you're doing here? They actually don't know. It's my friend from back home's family that's supporting me out here. Over the next few moments, Savannah went through a brief history of how things had been going with her parents. She had told them about her conversion story and how her parents hadn't been supportive. She tried not to get into her and Brett too much for fear of being questioned more. She only hoped it was what the president was looking for. Well, Sister Michelson, I just wanted you to know we have all been praying for you, and we've been hoping that things have turned around for you. Thank you. May I just make an observation, Sister? Sure. I've noticed that when I've tried to ignore things by working harder, that does last for a while, but soon those things I tried to ignore come back into my life with full force. What are you suggesting, President? Only that sometimes confronting the problem sooner is harder, but ultimately brings peace the quickest. Then with that, Savannah left his office, ready to head out proselyting with her new companion. That was waiting in the waiting room outside the mission president's office. Chapter 24. It was an interesting time for me, knowing that God would send me to Jerusalem on my mission, but also watching the war going on there between the Jews and the Palestinians. There was no way with the current status of things that I could be sent there, and yet, as in times past, God's ways are not the world's ways. I didn't know it at the time, but there were two things that had been put in place to make Jerusalem a safer place before I was to go there. One was that a smart young politician from Turkey that seemed promising, and that most of the world had been taken with for the past several years, promised he would help bring peace between the Jews and the Palestinians. This wouldn't work, of course, but the second action that was in process would. For a long time, the prophet as well as the quorum of the 12 apostles had been praying about which two apostles would go to Jerusalem to help initiate the teaching before Christ would come. It would only be weeks before I would get my call that they would have their answer. I had been feeling a lot better for a while. The breathing problem seemed to have subsided, and I kept up with my Jewish studies as well as my studies of the Book of Mormon. It was during one night while I was studying in my room that Mom and Dad said I should come upstairs. There on the news, this politician from Turkey, Mikhail Robenstern, had met with the top leaders of the Jewish community as well as the Palestinian community. People were raving at his ability to bring these two parties together. The fact that they were even talking made the world stop and look at this man. For so many years, people had not been able to bring these two together in hopes of peace. Unfortunately, what the world would not hear was the amount of money Mikhail offered these parties to even meet. He didn't care what they did so long as they met and appeared to get along for 1 week before he would make his next move. It was during that week, and times to come, that many became entranced by this man. Even Mom and Dad were impressed by what he was able to do. It was soon, however, that Mom and Dad's attention was driven elsewhere. They had received a call late one Sunday night in November that they weren't expecting at all. Mom, Dad, Brett's quivered voice came across the line. Both Mom and Dad were on the phone after Bishop Snow had called them and informed them of Brett's state of mind and what he wanted to do. It had been too long since he had heard from Savannah, and the truth was, Brett didn't feel like he was making enough of a difference with the people of Jackson County. And his desire to be with Savannah started to outweigh his willingness to work. The real truth of the matter was that he felt like finally he didn't have enough, or that he gave too much. He wasn't sure. He had served a faithful mission to Iraq and had done well most of his life, but now he felt he was nearing the end of his strength or desire. He felt like God had asked enough of him, and that there would be no shame in going to Savannah and letting others finish the work. Bishop Snow had met with him and tried to counsel him about the Lord just being happy with some effort. If Brett could do even something small each day to help the people move forward, that would be enough. But Brett explained his mental state and that he couldn't do it anymore. Bishop Snow arranged a phone call with Mom and Dad. "What's the matter, son? Bishop Snow says you've been having a hard time," Dad said. "Mom, Dad, I just can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm stuck. I'm at the end of my strength." Brett's voice was filled with tears, and it was hard for Mom and Dad to even understand him. They had never heard their son like this. It was so unexpected that they wanted to try and prove to Brett that he could do it. "Son, you just have to keep working. You can't quit yet," Dad explained. "I just can't, Dad. I don't have anything left. My mind isn't in it anymore. I just have to come home. There's no other option." "Brett, it's Mom. You know I love you more than anything, and that I would do anything for you. I know you can do this. Just tell me, no matter what it is, what do you need for you to stay out there?" Dad was so happy that Mom had stepped in at that time. Dad was about to lose it because when he was younger, he went on his mission after his younger brother had died. He tried his best, but because of how his mind was and with some things he had done to himself, he had to come home because of medical reasons. So to see his own son struggling with it now was killing him. I need you guys. That's what I need. It was all Brett could get out before breaking down. So Mom and Dad had a conversation with Bishop Snow, and a flight was scheduled for them to come down and be with their son for 1 week before they would have to leave Brett on his own to complete what the Lord had sent him out to do. Savannah had been working very hard with her new companion. She had worked so much that for a while there she had forgotten about the problems that she had been having with her parents, and about the things that had happened between her and Brett. The only thing on her mind was the people she was working for, and getting people ready to live the life of consecration. One night, however, as she was sleeping, Savannah had a dream where she was out in a bright, happy place where people were so joyful and loving, and near the end of the dream she looked to the side where there was a cliff, and looking down there was a dark, deep pit where a lot of noise seemed to come from. She recognized the voices of her parents, and looking down she saw they were beckoning out to her. It was the look on her parents' faces that caused her to wake in the middle of the night in a sweat, no less, which wasn't a typical thing for Savannah. She rarely had dreams that shook her so bad. Not sure if it would work, Savannah pulled out a paper and started to write a letter to her parents that she hoped would bring her some peace and allow her to sleep. Dear Mom and Dad, let me start by saying that I know things haven't always been the greatest between us, but I've always loved and respected you as my parents, and I want nothing but the best for you. I know that I'm the person I am today because of the things you've taught me and the hard work ethic you've instilled in me. Now, as for where things are with me, I want you to know that I am safe and doing better than I've ever have before. I'm involved in a work that fills my whole life and is part of who I am now. I know there are many things about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints faith that you don't agree with, and I don't want to belittle that at all. I am now a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church. I have been for almost 2 years now. Brett baptized me here in Missouri, where I am now working for the church. I know this isn't the lifestyle you wanted me to have, and I don't even expect for you to be happy about it. But just know that this is who I am now, and nothing will ever change that. Know that I love you, and that I want all the best for you. Love, Savannah. It was about a week later that the Michelsons received the letter that was dated November 3rd, 2033, and it was that same night that the Michelsons bought tickets to Missouri. They're going to see their daughter and try to persuade her that they still were her parents, and that they wanted the best for her, and they felt they knew what she should be. So they left to tell her what they felt she should do. It was November 5th through the 13th that Mom and Dad were to be in Independence with Brett, and it was on November 8th that I received my mission call in the mail. I knew that I should wait for Mom and Dad to open it, but I couldn't wait. So when it came, I decided to open it, and on the phone, read it to Mom and Dad. I had been reading in 3rd Nephi, chapter 11, the day when my call came, and needless to say, it was a lot to take in that day, as the day was not over yet. It was right after I got the mail at 10 a.m. that day that I called Mom and Dad and told them I got my call and that I couldn't wait to read it to them. Okay, son, go ahead, we're listening. Okay, so it says, Dear Elder Larson, you've been called to serve in Jerusalem. It was then that the attack came. I was going to finish the letter, but it came on all of a sudden. I had to run outside and struggle to breathe. It wasn't working well enough. I felt like I was breathing through a straw, even though I was out in the fresh air. I wasn't sure what to do, so quickly I ran next door to the neighbors. Knocking on the door, I ran past the Bilsons to find some paper to write on. I wrote quickly that I couldn't breathe and that I needed to be taken to the hospital. They acted quickly and got me in the car. Somewhere along the way, I'd passed out. It wasn't until much later that Mom and Dad were able to read my full mission call. After that call, Mom and Dad, of course, were anxious about me and what was going on. So they were faced with a dilemma. They quickly called neighbors to see if they would go check on me. It was when they reached the Bilson cell phone that they filled them in on what had happened. I had been taken to the Instacare at first, but seeing that my lungs weren't doing well and that my oxygen saturation was very low, they got me up to the lung specialist in Ivinson Memorial Hospital. They thought it could be pneumonia, so they started to treat me for that. So what do you think we should do? Mom asked Dad privately outside of Brett's apartment. Brett had been very down and only slightly better at Mom and Dad's arrival. He didn't want to disappoint them, and the guilt he was feeling was great, and it only seemed to increase as Mom and Dad tried to encourage him to stay. They both knew that he needed them there to try and convince him to stay. "I think you're right, honey. I think you should stay, and I'll fly back to be with Tom." "Are you sure? You don't think we should both go?" "Honey, you have a special connection with Brett. I know you're what he needs right now. Don't worry about Tom. I'll call you once I get there. Everything will be fine." Mom and Dad cried as they prepared to tell Brett what had happened with me and that Dad would need to leave early, but that Mom would stay with him. It was as Dad was getting on his flight that he passed the Michelsons, who were getting off the plane. Only Dad was focused on getting to me, so he didn't notice them. He flew in a nervous wreck, trying to get back to me as soon as possible, his mind filled with the horrors of watching his little brother die of a similar lung problem. Once the plane landed, he called Mom to help reassure him. He felt his strength was leaving him, and he needed the comfort of Mom to help him keep pressing on. So it was her support that got Dad to hurry in his journey to where I lay in my hospital bed, unsure as to what my fate might be.